Well, greetings Commanders and welcome back to Elite Dangerous and another look in VR at another ship. This time it's the Adder. Now, I'm stood here between the two chairs so I can say firstly hello to Commander Headless and also to show you something else, which is what the starboard services and other menus look like in VR. So if you open it up, in actual fact, it's kind of two-layered. There is the layer for the actual menu itself, and then there is this blackened one-way non-see-through layer of black, so that you get a bit of a background there so you don't actually have the see-through menu. So that's how they do the menus, which I thought is kind of interesting. When I first started playing Elite Dangerous, I was very excited to get the Adder because it was going to be my first ship that actually had a co-pilot seat. That was back when I thought that the co-pilot seat would actually be occupied by somebody. Never mind. So to orientate yourself in terms of where you're sitting and what you can see normally, everything in this ship, the take-home point is much further away than it seems to be in the 2D version. And I think part of the problem is that coffee cup over there is a pain for scale because it is actually huge. And as I get closer to it, I'll give you a bit more of an idea of the scale. But if you look down at that in 2D, you think, okay, coffee cup, that's about that big. No, it's about double the size of a regular coffee cup. And I think that actually lulls you into thinking that this space is much smaller than it actually is. So what we'll do is we'll start in the center, and straight in front of you, you can see this panel here with lights and switches on it. Each of those switches is about the size of the end piece or the end joint on your thumb. Each of those switches down here and the four across the top there, and the entire panel is about 1.5 feet by about 8 inches in width. Up above that there is just a Zorgen-Peterson symbol and a vent and your skylight, which is great for enjoying the view, I guess. Then back in the center you have these very large, looks like air vents. They almost seem like they have like mushroom shaped stoppers in them or diffusers, but these are gigantic air vents. Probably the one on the left is about the thickness of a grown man's calf. So just to give you the perspective on that one, that circle there, I'm not sure what that's designed for, but it is just a circle approximately the size of a small side plate. Down here we have some sort of a contraption with a smaller contraption coming out of it and some wires going into something. Oh, under the desk. Can we see anything under here? No, so it becomes see-through when you get down here and the wires stop almost immediately, which is unfortunate. And there is this glowing disc thing that also is see-through at the back. The materials for the cockpit and the floor seem to mostly be metal over there, inlays of plastic here, and some sort of a non-brushed, not really treated metals on the side there. So fairly basic kind of generic cockpit setup. And the view from the co-pilot's seat is even more boring. There is nothing in front of them. Presumably in multi-crew you have a panel that appears, even if this thing can be used in multi-crew. I've never even checked. I'm sure it can be. And over there you can see old Headless and the classic graphical glitch showing the landing gear coming up through the floor. But you'll see that as a theme in all of the ships that I review in this series. Over here there is some sort of a panel. It has ATV, RSN, DRX and auxiliary, and wires coming out of that, which is in fact the second wire that you saw going down underneath the console. And the wire is just plugged into the side as my tracking loses its mind. Down here there are more switches. Again, these are the size of the end of your thumb to give you an indication of how big those are. Now, this cup, bane of my life in terms of scale. So the cup is that high, so it's about 1 foot high. It is that wide. So if you did think that this was a normal cup, now you know slightly better. And the irony, of course, is that the handle that comes out the side is not actually wide enough for you to stick your hand into. So, not sure what's going on with this proportion of this thing, but it is much larger than I ever thought it was, and I think that's what made me think that this whole area was actually not that big. Alright, and if I stand in the very corner of the cockpit, you can sort of get to understanding how large this space is. And if I walk towards the commander chair, this is how far I would have to actually go to be able to touch the commander headless on the shoulder there. So that gives you a sense of how large this space in the back, which is entirely undecorated and hopelessly useless, actually is. Not sure what that circle is meant to represent up there. Maybe some sort of a hologram emitter, or perhaps just some greebling. But yes, I would say probably from this wall all the way to that wall over there is a good 5 meters maybe, something like that. Now while we're here, let's explore the floor and things over here. So again, poor in terms of decorations and stuff. A couple of panels there attached to the wall, one in brushed steel and one in plastic. Nothing that opens or closes, ironically, for a van. But as a van, I guess you'd expect that it is fairly modestly decorated, and that is how it comes across. I forgot to mention the one thing that you can see from the pilot's chair is this overhead cabinet here. You can't see those 2 lights on the outside of it when you're sitting down, but it just seems like an overhead locker that you might find in any airliner, although it is only about a foot by a foot in terms of dimensions, and probably only a foot high. So in terms of how much you could fit in there, maybe a small backpack or a camera bag or something like that. Right, so now the moment you've all been waiting for, the walk through the door at the back there. So see, I'm standing here right next to the commander chair. I could be touching it here along the edge. I'm going to actually physically walk back there so you can see how much of a walk it actually is. So let's go straight through that door, shall we? Right, and here we are inside the adder itself. So what you can see immediately are these 2 things that are glitching out, and the one's not, the 2 small hard points that you have there, and there is another hard point there on the roof. Through there, the box that you can see in the back there, which is approximately 6 to maybe 8 feet in height, approximately 10 or 11, maybe even 12 feet across, is the cargo bay itself. And down there you can see the rear struts for the landing gear and some other engines and bits of greebling and things on the top there, in addition to the wings on the back of the adder. So in terms of interior space for when we get space legs, there is a huge amount in the adder, and I imagine that this space will be easily decked out with living quarters and storage and all sorts of stuff. The adder is actually a very, very large ship compared to how it feels. It feels sort of maybe the size of a standard space shuttle, especially given the cockpit setup. I would say it's probably at least double that size that you may expect it to be in your own mind. And down here you can see the landing gear and ladder to get up into the ship. It is exactly the same landing gear and configuration and size, shape and everything else as the hauler landing gear. So if you watch that video, you get a better idea of what this landing gear looks like. But in terms of the actual spacing, you can see that the landing gear comes down here. The person would come up to about there. There'd be a landing here, I would imagine. And then they would have to do a UE and go into that door. So it doesn't quite work in terms of the positioning for space legs. But eventually I'm sure that they'll change how it all works on the interior. Unless you came up here, crawled around and went on a small catwalk in there, which I guess is always a possibility. And here from the rear as you approach, you can start to get a sense of how large the adder actually is and how big that door is and how far up it is. Now, in fact, the door itself is the wrong scale. I would estimate it to be about that high and only about that wide. So once you got up there, you would have to actually finagle yourself in there a little bit. It's not actually a human-sized door. But in terms of clearance from the ground, I would say at least a good sort of 6 feet to the underside of the adder there, and the entire thing to the very top of the spoilers there would probably be a 3-story building, to the windows of a 3-story building, not to necessarily the roof. And here is another look at the underside of the adder from a 6-foot tall person's perspective. So you can see down there into, the camera won't let me do it. You can see down there into the landing bay. The first step of that ladder, I would estimate, starts about here. So it'd be quite a hoik of your leg to get it up to the first rung, but then the climb up into the ship itself would be relatively simple. And here at the same height as my commander, it is approximately the same canopy height or cockpit height as a jet airliner, as in a 737 or something similar. But in terms of width, it is much wider than a 737. In fact, the cockpit version of the 737 would be from the edge of that side window on the right-hand side, as if I was the commander of the commander, that little side panel window all the way to the edge, and to the center of the actual cockpit windows. That would be the size of a 737's cockpit in its entirety. So double that and then probably triple that to get to the edges of the front here, and again probably double it to get to the edges of the actual wings. In terms of wingspan, it's hard to estimate, but I would say possibly the similar wingspan to the Eagle to the edges. So the wingspan is not gigantic, but certainly it's not nothing either. Alright commanders, there's your quick look at the adder. I hope you enjoyed me shoving my head through things and giving you an idea of what spacelegs would look like with this ship. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, show the next door neighbours, and I'll see you in the next video with another ship. Fly safe, commanders.